Welcome to the Cause Effect 4.0, the podcast where we explore technology, innovation, and human ingenuity that's shaping our world and creating new opportunities for impact. I'm Celina Lee, and today I'm delighted to be joined by someone who has spent nearly a decade helping define and connect Africa's AI ecosystem. Dr. Nick Bradshaw is the founder and CEO of AI Media Group and the creator of the AI Expo Africa, the continent's largest enterprise AI automation and smart technology conference. He's also the founder and director of the South African AI Association, a community of more than 4,500 members working to advance responsible AI across business, government, academia, startups, and civil society. Nick's journey into AI is anything but conventional. Originally from the UK, Nick earned a PhD in chemistry, then moved to South Africa and built and exited a successful Microsoft Gold Partner business before turning his attention to one of the most important technological shifts of our time. Today, he sits at the intersection of policy, investment, entrepreneurship, research, and ecosystem building. In this conversation, we'll explore the realities behind Africa's AI boom and the opportunities and risks of sovereign AI. Welcome to the podcast, Nick.
Well, thanks, Celina. It's great to be on the podcast.
Thank you. Okay, so Nick, you've built businesses, you've advised startups, including Zindi. You've been contributing to the AI national strategy discussions. So looking back, when you first started this journey, what first convinced you that AI would become a defining force in Africa's future?
Wow, that's a big one to start off with, Celina. Thanks for that. Basically, I wanted to self-educate myself initially. I took a little bit of time off after my first venture, mainly to recover. Quite exhausting building a business. If any fellow entrepreneurs are listening, you'll know how that feels.
And in Africa.
Yeah, I think anywhere. I think being an entrepreneur is can sometimes feel like a Sisyphean task. It's not what it looks like on television, and therefore, yeah, I wanted to educate myself. So first of all, I was genuinely interested in AI and automation. I was hearing all about this World Economic Forum and the Fourth Industrial Revolution and trying to find out more about it. And when I started going to events and meetups, it was mainly developers, people who hardcore data scientists like yourself, people talking about linear statistics and all, basically I felt this was a very interesting space, but that particular space was not necessarily for me. Whilst I have the forehead of a techie, I don't consider myself a techie, but I have dabbled in programming and system and software engineering. So I wanted to find a community I felt was missing, which was the sort of business startup investor ecosystem. When I looked at what was going on around me, there really wasn't that much happening. There was some general tech events. There were people talking about 4IR, and really it just wasn't scratching the surface. What was being reported at the time was also quite limited. It was always the one or two startups in Africa that was circulated on all the same press releases, and yet I was meeting tens and tens of entrepreneurs setting up new businesses. So it really started from self-interest, self-learning, and then realizing there was an opportunity to bring people together. We launched a magazine, we launched the event, we launched a YouTube channel, and 9 years later or 8 years later, our event is over 3,000 delegates, 100 exhibitors, our association 4,600 members and growing daily, and now we've shifted our focus into looking at promoting responsible AI as a concept to people, providing zero barriers to entry. Everything we offer is free, free training, CPD accreditation, credits, frameworks, links to resources. And we feel, things are heading in the right direction. And now more recently just launched the Western Cape AI Cluster Project here in Cape Town, at the provincial level, really now looking at things like citizen AI, government and citizen interacting. Citizens now have access to some pretty powerful AI tools in their pockets or on their laptops. What are citizens doing with AI? So it's been quite a journey, and one that's never ending.
Yeah, definitely. If you look back, I mean, right, you mentioned that you launched AI Expo Africa 8 years ago, which is also when Zindi launched. So I
Yeah, that's
remember the
right.
first day well. Um, when you look back at that journey in the last 8 years, what are some of the most surprising changes that you see? I mean, when you look back at what was cutting edge and or considered cutting edge at that time.
Yeah, I think from a commercial perspective, it was very much all about, RPA and intelligent process automation in businesses. I mean, I think there certainly was a lot of kind of very specific use cases of AI, like things like predictive maintenance in mining or predictive failure, using AI to solve some very specific point solutions in industries that were willing to pay for it. But that was sort of pre generative AI, pre everything. It was really, fundamental AI, of what I might call the old school. Where we are post November 2022 and where we are today, I mean, where we are today is very different from where we were at the beginning of the year. We're only 6 months in. Um, but I think the obvious observation is there's been this huge, uh, sort of steep increase in speed of innovation. And if you look at, if you're in Silicon Valley or you're in Paris or London or Singapore, or if you're in Dubai, you get a real sense when you're in those places talking to fellow practitioners that there's a lot happening, and there's a lot happening at pace, and there's an urgency, there's capital, there's investment opportunities, and I think obviously bringing that back here. Um, yes, you see this, the urgency and interest, amongst fellow entrepreneurs, but actually that's somewhat missing when you start talking to the broader ecosystem, when you start talking to government. Um, there's some degree of skepticism in some quarters, which is understandable.
Yeah.
Um, I think it's complicated, but we have an ecosystem. I mean, there are 1,400 companies in South Africa with a declared specialism in AI. We've got continent around 5,900 companies. Um, so yeah, it's an ecosystem. But if I was to compare it to California, there's about 6,600 companies in California alone. So just to kind of
Yeah.
say the whole of Africa could fit inside California. So it is
Yeah.
a sort of slightly different quantum of number and volume of investment.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of that, kind of when you look at Africa and South Africa in the global context, of course, there's a lot of concerns around the digital divide, and is AI going to be an equalizer? Is it going to be a deepener of that digital divide? Um, what is your take? What evidence are you seeing, or what is the opportunity, I guess, to make it more on the side of an equalizer rather than a deepener of that divide?
Yeah, again, that's a big question, and I think the buzzword at the moment is sovereign AI and DPI, digital
Mm,
public infrastructure. Um, those are like new words for things we know already. Basically, where is your server and how is it governed? Okay. For me personally, that debate hasn't really changed, but now people are more attuned to actually where is this algorithm, where is this data, how was it trained, um, where is this being sent? How is my personal data being used? If you're a consumer using products like LinkedIn or WhatsApp or Facebook, that's a concern. If you're a business user, government or commercial, what if we're using hyperscaler X, what does that mean for our data sitting both here in South Africa and maybe where it might be sitting somewhere else on the continent, in another server somewhere else in the world? What does that mean for privacy, security, risk? And as these models have evolved, we're beginning to hear news around, huge security risk being presented from the frontier models being able to find vulnerabilities, et cetera, et cetera. So it's quite a complex landscape. The digital divide, I think, is a almost a separate question, and one where I think governments need to play a much bigger role. Um, it's not something you can passively sit back and let industry solve on its own. You have to drive it tops down. And I think where you go to places where government is bought into new technologies, I use Dubai and the UAE as an example, you tend to see that things are driven tops down, and that
Yeah.
there is a very, very clear policy and vision around bringing people together, both in as citizens and business together. So I think that, I mean, I don't think you asked the question, how do we solve the digital divide? Because I think to solve that digital divide requires many stakeholders, but it has to be driven and owned by government. If you want your citizens to all enjoy the benefits, then you have to lead from the top, and you can't wait for industry to do this for you. If you do that and you do it in a broadly
Mm.
unregulated environment, then many different things and many different outcomes can occur. Some intentional and some potentially accidental. So yeah, it's a very
Yeah.
interesting landscape. It's changing every.
What are some of the best practices or even the pitfalls? But what are, you had mentioned Dubai and the UAE, and I mean, what are some of the things that you think are working? That maybe African governments should take notice of. I mean, in terms of investment, regulation, policy.
Yeah, I think every country needs to look at what they're doing themselves in the main. I think we keep using this word like Africa, Africa, Africa. I mean, that is 54 countries,
Yeah.
accounting for something like 18% of the population of the globe. And, the global north, the global south, the east, the west, there's different ways of framing these debates that you see in the public domain. Really, every country broadly has to look after its own policy and strategy. Can it take the best bits from the African Union or the European Union? Could it take some best practice from Singapore or the United Arab Emirates or France? Yes, it certainly could. But I think given the complexity and scale of AI across the whole of society, the whole of industry, the whole of government, given its complexity, you have to almost break it down and start at the country level first and say, okay, what are we doing at the nation state level? What are we doing on our policy? What are we doing on our strategy? And get those things in order first of all. And at the same time, be cognizant of, well, how does this overlap with the African Union? How does this overlap with the European Union? If you're a bank and you're operating globally or regionally across multiple countries, what are the implications of that? So I think nations, I've come from Europe originally. I've been in South Africa for 17 years. Um, if you look at the complexity of the European Union, which is technically a smaller population of nation states, um, it's taken them many, many, many years just to get to where they are today. And arguably, some people are saying that their AI Act, the European AI Act, is maybe too far. It's gone too far in terms of it. Um, but people are
Right.
beginning to educate themselves now and become more aware around, hang on a minute, what is happening to my data? What about facial recognition technology? What's happening with my data on Instagram, and why am I getting these adverts? You know,
Yeah.
people are now beginning to question that. And a lot of that, whilst not necessarily related specifically to AI, falls into the debate of privacy, accuracy, bias, ethics. If you're a child and you're being sent gambling adverts, ethically that's not good. Is that something wrong with the algorithm? Is that something to do with the mobile provider? Is that something to do with the app? So it's quite a complicated thing. And so I think nation state policy and strategy is in the most important first step. Rather than trying to fit in with everything everywhere in the world, pick the best bits to build your own nation state policy. And, we're beginning to see these emerge now across the continent, which is great news.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe bringing it closer to home to South Africa. You're leading the association, and then you mentioned this initiative with the Western Cape government. Like, what are some of the exciting initiatives that you see coming out of South Africa?
Well, I mean, just recently I became made aware about a township AI lab that's been created. Again, in what for most people in the Western world would consider a very marginalized, poor community of people who've been
Mhm.
previously disadvantaged. They now have built their own AI lab. What does that actually mean? I actually have a meeting this week to find out. But that's the great thing about working in a constrained environment. It drives innovation. There are people out there willing to commit voluntarily to building solutions in their communities. The spirit of Ubuntu, we talk about that a lot in this region, this idea of people collaborating together for the greater good. Um, so if AI as a technology is making its way to what you would traditionally call the disconnected or the previously disadvantaged, what are people in those environments using this technology to solve? They may come up with completely novel solutions that maybe the hyperscalers and others are not thinking about because they're not looking there. Um, and we know that within those ecosystems, there's been some amazing innovation. Obviously, through your own evolution of Zindi and launching it here in South Africa, there are many people who are in situations which broadly resemble poverty in the eyes of the West, and yet within the ecosystem that they live in, they thrive as best they can, but then they solve the problems that they face on a daily basis with the tools that they have around them. Now, if we can put an AI lab in a previously disadvantaged community, imagine the possibilities of what we could do if we shine a light on that and promote that and get more people interested in that as an activity. So those are some of the things we're doing within that new initiative at the provincial level, and then hopefully that becomes a blueprint for other provinces, maybe other states in other countries to also copy and replicate.
Amazing. I mean, I think, yeah, like you said, Africa is 54 distinct countries with distinct kind of opportunities and challenges. In South Africa, it does feel like it's uniquely positioned. I mean, it's one of the largest markets. It has an incredibly talented youth population, as you said, across even areas of the country that are, less resourced, but that also leads to more innovation. I'm curious now, taking a step up, like you've been running AI Expo Africa, so you've also had a front seat to like the private sector and what some of the largest companies are doing in South Africa. So what are some of the trends that you see in terms of AI adoption, or the ways that the private sector are using AI?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think when we look at the segments of industry that come to our event, the biggest one is banking, insurance, the financial giants. They are obviously they've got the capital deployment capabilities to build their own in-house models or to build their own in-house capabilities, which is great, and we're seeing a lot of that. I think when you look at entrepreneurism, there are two kinds of entrepreneur. There are those that are building AI plugged into an existing solution. So maybe they're using AI to help automate food delivery on scooters. I'm just using that as a general example, not a specific example per se. Um, or you've got organizations which are purely native, AI native, they're AI first companies. So everything they do is driven by a deep desire to um, develop a holistically AI solution that's solving a very, very specific problem. Um, a very good example of that is InstaDeep in Tunisia. So for any of the listeners here, um, InstaDeep is a story where two entrepreneurs created essentially an AI lab um, based business to solve really hard problems using AI and deep learning. And they recently got acquired by German biotech firm called BioNTech for, I think, north of 650 million US dollars. So a massive success story for the continent and Tunisia. I think where entrepreneurs are going to be struggling is if you're building on top of something that you don't own. So Tunisia, Tunisia was specifically developing their own IP and solutions themselves. Another good example is AI diagnostics here in South Africa. So they've actually amassed a unique data set on audio signals from people breathing with tuberculosis, TB. So their unique proposition is the data that they've created to build the model, which they then plug into a basic off-the-shelf stethoscope. So I
Yeah.
think where entrepreneurs need to consider their unique proposition is either they should be thinking AI native, AI first in terms of the nature of their business, or secondly, if you're using some off the shelf proprietary technologies and maybe you're connecting into a well-known hyperscaler or a public cloud, um, that your moat, your unique proposition is the very data that you've got to train your model. If you're just
Mm.
building a chatbot of WhatsApp, you better be doing something pretty specific, because that's easily copyable. It's hard to kind of defend against that if someone comes in and says, "Hey, we're a bigger company, we're just going to copy you." So I think that's where I see that kind of split in the industry. You're either AI native, AI first, and you're building unique data sets to protect what it is you've developed, or you're, and I don't want to use the word wrapper type company here, but um, we're starting to see the emergence of one person company, micro startups, one or two people using various coding technologies to develop a product, launch a website, launch a sales team, generate all their documentation, and basically launch a business with one or two people. That is a
Yeah.
proposition which this year has become very viable. And I think for emerging markets, that's actually a very interesting proposition for people to jump into. You don't need to go and find a technical co-founder per se. You could create a beta project, a beta product, pre MVP on the side fairly quickly for basically tens of dollars. I mean, I had to recruit a team in India offshore and work with a bunch of strangers. Well, now I can spin up an agent and auto code, vibe code, whatever phrase you want to use. I can create an MVP or pre-MVP product and start testing it and do some A/B testing or share it with people to test, and you can do that in days. So that has basically changed the paradigm for entrepreneurs to build product, build something that's viably robust, as long as you know what you're doing, um, and get that to market. So I think again for emerging markets, this is a very interesting opportunity and time to be alive if you're an entrepreneur where you've previously been working in a constrained environment, cash constraint, founder constraint. Maybe you couldn't afford to go to the accelerator or the incubator. Well, if you can afford $20 a month or a subscription that you can share with colleagues, then you can start building some interesting stuff.
Yeah, definitely. Uh, so I'm going to give you a little statistic. So global AI investment is projected to surpass 300 billion annually by 2027. But studies show that 80% of AI projects never make it into production. From what you've seen, and you've given some examples of startups and and even financial services providers. What do you think separates the few products and companies that are able to scale and those that fail? What are some of the common pitfalls when you think about like AI actually scaling in
Yeah.
industry in real life?
I was hoping your next question was going to be an easy one, Celina. That's about three questions in one. So, um, why do projects fail? Well, first of all, I don't believe the stats. I mean, there are stats and stats and stats that keep coming. I mean, the last statistic was 95% of AI projects fail. Now it's 85, and then there'll be someone else saying 65, and then it'll be 72, and like lots of things fail, right? And they fail for a variety of reasons. More often than not, it's nothing to do with technology, right? It's to do with people, right? It's to do with your change program. Okay, if you remove the word AI from any of these statistics, technology projects in general fail, right? And they fail because for a myriad of reasons: lack of buy-in, lack of vision, lack of strategy. Um, you don't have an in-house competency that you can plug a gap in. You're not able to build it yourself. You rely on contractors. You don't manage your contractors. There's lots and lots of reasons why these projects fail, but the headline is what people read in the newspaper. AI is bad, AI is failing, therefore everything is a failure. I don't believe it. Yes, things fail. Company here in South Africa has failed to deploy SAP again. It's like these technologies that have been around a long time. CRM is the graveyard of failure, right? Even simplistic technology change programs fail. So if you introduce AI, yeah, high probability is going to fail, but it's not going to fail because of AI alone. It's going to fail
Yeah.
because you haven't got a data strategy, or you haven't got a competency to build a model, or you're not able to put good data into. So there's lots of reasons why these projects fail, and project failure is just something which is a normal kind of process within any enterprise on the planet, big or small. Flipping it round to the entrepreneur, why might entrepreneurs be failing? Well, that's a difficult one because being an entrepreneur is not easy from the get-go, and I don't believe anybody finds it easy. I think, entrepreneurs will fail in this environment because they basically don't start with the end in mind. Again, I say this to a lot of entrepreneurs when I give talks on it. Why are you building what you are building? Ask them that question and then be silent for 5 seconds and see what they say. A lot of entrepreneurs don't understand necessarily what the end goal is. They're not building their business to exit it. They're not building their business to have impact. They're building their business out of necessity to survive. So enforced entrepreneurship in emerging market is a real thing. And unfortunately, when you work with an enforced entrepreneur, you don't enjoy it, you give up early, and it's hard. It's really hard. If waking up as an entrepreneur, the world looks rosy and you jump out of bed and you bounce into your office like Tigger um, from uh, from the Jungle Book. I think is Tigger from the Jungle Book. I can't remember my children's stories now. But if you think life is good and you enjoy what you're doing and you have a purpose in what you're doing, so it might be commercial, it might be impact. You're an impact entrepreneur, Celina. Um, your motivations for doing it are very different. And for a very small percentage of entrepreneurs, they know exactly why they're building their business. They know exactly how they want to build it, where they want to exit it. They want to IPO, they want to exit to a European um, liquidity event, or they want to get whatever it is they might want to do with their business. There's a small portion of entrepreneurs that have a laser focus on the end goal. And broadly speaking, if they find themselves in the right funding environment, their product is successful and they get a degree of customer traction, whether it's consumers or enterprise, then yeah, you probably will achieve your goal and exit your business and make some good money. That playbook is well rehearsed in Silicon Valley. That is the playbook. That's where most of the capital is. That's where most of the cutting edge innovation is happening. And there's lots of investors willing to take early stage risk and put big bets down for entrepreneurs that know exactly what they're doing in the main. Unfortunately, we don't have this here in emerging markets. We don't have that here in Africa region. We do have an investment ecosystem. It's very fragmented. It typically favors later stage investments, which are less risky, which is completely understandable. Um, I think a lot of founders give up early because they feel that they need investment when they maybe don't. The best investor in your business is a customer. And so they struggle to get a customer, they struggle to get investment, and they're stuck in that sort of grey area of, I can't find customers and I can't find investment, therefore I can't sustain myself. Yes, have there been failures, spectacular failures in the region? Yeah, of course there have. There's spectacular failures everywhere. Sam Bankman-Fried, Theranos. There's lots of these spectacular global failures that we hear about in the news, and Africa's no different. It's just that it happens in a constrained environment. The press and media landscape here does not favor necessarily promoting and evangelizing around celebrating entrepreneurship. It rather takes the more negative angle and focuses on the failures. And those stories perpetuate, which is one of the reasons why we launched our own magazine, to tell a positive story around success for people that would never make it into the press and media. So, I think when you launched your business, Cindy, in 2018, there were 5 or 6 similar startups at the time. I still see headlines now with those five startups being mentioned to this day. And unfortunately, that happens to be a cycle which is difficult to break. So, but yeah, we from the 1,400 or so that we've identified in South Africa, half of them are startups, and more than half of those are less than 10 staff.
Yeah, yeah. This is why I can ask you the hard questions because you're a wise man. You always you always come with the gems for
I'll take that
sure.
as a compliment.
Yes. And I totally agree with that perspective. I mean, on so many levels. That's why this question is a weird, that question is a weird one, talking about the failures of, projects or startups in Africa. Like I share your sentiment, and also failures are not really, in this world of innovation and startups, like, failure is probably the wrong framing for what we're defining as a failure, right? Um,
Yeah, look, I
it
think
is
people get
part
a
of
little
the,
bit. Sorry, Selena,
yeah.
there was a bit of delay there. I think people get a little bit precious about the word failure and success, right? For vast majority of entrepreneurs, if you build a moderately successful business, it will sustain you and give you a good lifestyle. If you want to take it to the next level and exit that business, you have to think differently about how you build your business. Your competitors today are your exit partners of tomorrow. And I think that's an ethos that, particularly when I talk to entrepreneurs here, they don't necessarily obviously see that as a way of growing their business. I grew my business here by latching on to a large tier one system integrator partner here locally in South Africa. They brought me clients. We did the niche work they couldn't do. They make 20%, 30% off the top. Everybody's happy. Okay. Um,
Yeah.
you cannot do it necessarily on your own. And even if you look at the Elon Musks of this world, he's surrounded by investors and advisors who are going to be giving him the top advice. He clearly has to pay for it, obviously. Um, and so I encourage entrepreneurs who might be listening to this, um, hook up with, go to an event, hook up with fellow entrepreneurs. We showcased 60 AI startups at AI Expo Africa last year. Go and talk to them. Go and talk to the big boys, the big girls, the people that are, in there who've spent money on a bigger stand, the system integrators. They are looking for companies like you to solve problems they can't solve themselves. And if you can show competency to them, they'll give you business. So the direct customer play is not always the most obvious one. Try and find a customer through a partner. That's a great way to grow a B2B business here. Developing long-term trusted relationships, as we all know, is very difficult. Let them develop that relationship and let them give you the work. And then at least you get the credibility and the traction and the cash flow. You may not be with them for maybe more than 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And at the end of that, you can turn around to you and say, hey, tell you what, we'd like to buy you guys. And it becomes an acqui-hire exit. So we just had an acqui-hire exit here in South Africa with a company called Advanced Guidance. They basically were
Oh,
so they basically were an advanced AI development house. They grew to about 75 people very quickly, winning a lot of work business in Europe and America, and they got acquired by a French company not so long ago. Um, that is a perfect example of an exit that, okay, you're not a unicorn or a soonicorn or whatever corn. I don't know what the trend is now with the corns. You have done something that very, very few people have done. You've built a business from scratch. You've succeeded in delivering successful client customers along the way and solutions to those customers. And a larger company has seen you as part of their growth strategy and they've come along and they've made you an offer. And basically, you've probably made enough money to retire broadly comfortably, or a big step towards it. And you're probably going to go on and do that again with another business. That is bread and butter entrepreneurism. It's not about the SpaceX and the whatever IPO that you're reading about in the news today. There's a very small percentage of people that do that. The run-of-the-mill entrepreneur is building something, maybe even a family business, small groups of people, and then they build something of value that a bigger company sees, and then they exit it. Which is why we're always trying to encourage people to think. Well, we did a trade mission to Dubai last year. We started developing a relationship with the French embassy and Station F in Paris. This is where you're going to find your exit partners, because they want market access. An entrepreneurial or a development team in another country, and you basically provide them with that. So lots of different ways you can exit your business. It's not all about listing on the stock exchange.
yeah. I mean, this is an honest question. Like, do you feel like that kind of advice, like that kind of advice, I think is very useful. It resonates for sure. Also, as an African startup ourselves, is that kind of advice do you think feel like it differs? given that you're talking to
Um,
an African startup audience versus like US?
I think the answer to that question is really what room are you in and where are you having that conversation? I looked at a slide that was produced or some research produced by A16, Andreas Horowitz, the big VC company in the USA, and they were characterizing VCs, VCs that take the most risk, and those VCs which are like posers, and those VCs that come in late, and those VCs that are just really kind of low risk, giving you steady returns, whatever that might be. And I think it just depends where you are, who you're talking to, the network that you have. You can end up talking to the wrong investor. You may end up getting bad advice, not necessarily from an investor. You might get bad advice from a bank. You might get bad advice from anyone. Um, so I think it is difficult to find the right mix of where you are in your journey, the advice I need at this moment in time, but it has to map to a clear vision of what you want to do with your business. Because quite frankly, most people are running really nice lifestyle businesses, and they may also be building something that's very exitable. They might not know or have not thought that what they're building is something that's very exitable. And so I think we need to get people in rooms to have different conversations around how businesses can evolve and grow, rather than always thinking it's always about getting a seed round and I must get pre-seed funding and I must then I must get Series A and I must that's Silicon Valley playbook. We rarely do that here. There isn't that volume of capital. That playbook doesn't sit very well here. You need to think more
Yeah.
strategically. What ecosystem should I get myself into? Who should I be talking to? Go and talk to three or four VCs. Go and talk to three or four accelerator or incubator leaders, and just ask some honest, honest questions, and see if you can get some honest opinions. Um, from what I hear in the ecosystem here, the VCs, they're struggling to make returns. There's a general downward trajectory on the volume of capital coming into the continent, and that it's shifting towards the lower risk capital end of the spectrum. So again, is going out there and trying to find a seed round something that's going to exhaust you, and do you need to do it? Um, has vibe coding changed that? You can develop a product without getting any funding other than paying a subscription. Yes, is that easy in theory or harder in theory? Well, it's practice versus theory are two different things, but yeah, we're just in this different paradigm, and I think we'll just see this next evolution where many early stage entrepreneurs won't need seed funding. The bit that got them to product is a subscription to Codex or yeah, an application generator, if I can use that. Um,
Yeah.
Rather than just going, well, I want a pre-seed round to hire two more developers and one tester so I can get my product shipped, 6 months earlier. And
Yeah.
that you can leapfrog that now with AI. So again, get out there and educate yourself.
It feels like the focus needs, or the focus now becomes much more on product market fit, or what problem is your product actually, what pain points are your product actually solving, and your business model, and that becomes your moat, because product or the technology is no longer the moat, right?
Yeah, I think if you're selling B2B, you've got to remember that the people that you're selling to are getting a lot of noises at the moment, a lot of noise. There's a
Yeah.
lot of noise and not enough signal, right? How do you stand out as the signal? Okay, easy to develop the product, easy to test it, easier to make the website look very convincing and that you've got a product behind it, and maybe even easier to get a few beta customers signed up. So
Yeah.
your signal has to stand out in a world of slop, right? I get so much slop email from people that don't exist asking me, would I like an offshore development team in India to develop AI apps? Well, unfortunately, I'm not that customer, right? We're a trade association. So the volume of slop and noise has increased exponentially. If you think you're going to go and knock on the door of a CIO of a bank and say, hey, I've got this really cool app, you need to pay attention to me. Well, there's 1,000 of you stood in a row waiting to talk to that same CIO. So in a way, the art of standing out, going back to product marketing and marketing yourself, I think that's where there's going to be some very creative ways of getting to decision makers to get your product in front of them. Yeah, cold calling, email, LinkedIn, even LinkedIn is becoming a bit AI sloppy now. If there's a new word, I've not just made that up. Um, you begin to find those places where you traditionally did work are no longer places where you get meaningful signal, and therefore you have to kind of evolve your own strategy about doing that and finding those people. Maybe, I mean, if you look at the trend with vinyl records have now outsold CDs, or they did. They crossed back. It's become a trend has come back that people want analog. Well, actually, meeting people in person and getting your signal in front of the right people means that maybe going back to in-person spaces is a way to go, as long as you can get the right people in that room. So
So
yeah,
interesting.
it's a tremendously difficult place to go and stand out when every man and his dog, or every woman and her dog, are doing the same thing as you, and you're all going after the same retailer, the same bank, the same customer. It's very difficult.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Uh, well, a second to last question is from the AI Association, the South African AI Association's perspective, what is your number one biggest concern in terms of AI having a positive long-term economic, impact in South Africa? What's kind of your key initiative or initiatives as an association?
Well, to answer the first part, I mean, I think broadly AI as a technology will have a positive impact on our lives at a degree where AI is being used in a responsible way. Now, in the darker spaces of the world, when you start talking about war and scenarios which are not necessarily always in the public domain, that's no difference from any time in history where countries have always tried to get an edge on how these technologies can be used. I mean, we've seen it in the Cold War, stealth technologies, space technology, nuclear weapons, etc., etc. Um, that world is going to carry on doing that thing. Automated robotic soldiers, or armed robotic dogs, whatever these scenarios are. That they are going to continue in research establishments. People are going to experiment with these technologies, and with the intention of pushing those technologies to do harm. And we shouldn't just even pretend that that's not happening. That is happening around the world. The flip side to that is then how do we use it as a force for good? And I see nothing but examples of how AI is being used positively. I mentioned AI diagnostics, the people who are using very niche AI to a very simplistic way of detecting if someone has TB using audio, heart and lung noise monitoring. Um, that's just one of many that we see. I had a meeting today with a group of guys who were innovating around automating the GP practice when doctors work with patients, building a graph of your patients so that they can see trends amongst the other doctors, and someone's reporting flu-like symptoms during COVID, or if there's heaven forbid, something like an Ebola outbreak, or some much more riskier disease. That this way of getting real-time information out of a real-time graph across a distributed information network. Those are really interesting use cases, and there are many, many hundreds of entrepreneurs that we talk to where we see it being used as a force for good. Um, as I say, AI Expo, we showcase them every year. We had 30 VCs in the room last year, and investments are happening because people are seeing the upside. So I think broadly I remain positive, and
Mhm.
I think where we are going with governance, we try and raise the concept of responsible AI through the association. If you go on our website, saiassociation.co, you'll see all the resources that we offer there, framework, standards, training materials. It's all free. We've even just launched a readiness assessment to assess yourself and your journey on AI adoption. So I see most very, very positive use cases in the main, but we shouldn't ignore the fact that things, particularly security, I think this is now security in the age of AI is maybe our biggest challenge. both from a identifying threats and fixing threats using the same technology. I think that's a big one for the next 5 to 10 years. I think an interesting space, particularly where we are in South Africa, because it's so sunny, is the merging of infrastructure, AI, and the energy debate, the energy mix. So I think there's an organization here called Terraco building the first solar green data center, for example, because we have a lot of sun hours here in the region. And then ultimately, as we go into the future, when you and I are retiring, Celina, whatever year that happens, the dawn of real quantum computing, fusion energy, an unlimited supply of energy coupled to compute and quantum, that could herald a whole new age of innovation that you and I probably don't even necessarily understand right now. So, yeah, there's some really interesting things. The final is the world of AI and applications and the world of data centers. They are almost like one thing now, and I think that's where hardware is having its renaissance again. It's cool to talk about servers. It's cool to talk about racks. I actually in a data center the other day. Um, yeah, these guys are growing, and it is happening here locally, within the constraints of the energy mix that we have. And you can't now talk about AI without talking about energy. You can't talk about a data center without saying, are you going to be able to supply me enough power so I can run CPU, GPUs in here to train my models, for example. We're seeing modular AI here, taking AI to remote locations. That's another trend that we're seeing here. Mining, offshore, taking AI to very difficult places. So it's an ever increasing, expanding market, and it's an interesting time to be alive.
Yeah, for sure. Actually, that's a good wrap up. I mean, because it kind of covers my last question, which was going to be, I guess, when we're
Is it a good time
retiring
to
or
be
like,
alive?
10 years, yeah, we're still alive. But 10 years from now, if you could just summarize that vision, I guess, is like, what would be if we did get it right, what would be what does the future look like in Africa? I mean, what would be the indicator to you or the milestone to you that says, okay, like Africa got it right. We've harnessed AI for good.
Yeah, look, I think the fundamental language research that's being done. I mean, we have 2,000 languages on the continent and numerous dialects. If in 10 years' time we've created a model to support 2,000 languages, and I think we've done a good job. The same would go for all languages around the world. I think ubiquitous AI that you don't have to pay for, in some fashion. They always say anything that's free, you're paying for it, right? So if you watch YouTube for free, you get adverts. If you use search, you get adverts. So I think ubiquitous AI in whatever form it takes, I think offers a lot of potential to everybody, citizen. I mean, if you think about it, the online training industry has been decimated by AI, mainly because now you have a teacher in your pocket, and you can say to that Claude or Gemini or whoever it might, whatever app you're using, ChatGPT, I'm a beginner in AI. Give me 2 weeks worth of learning, 1 hour per day to get me to a minimum standard of awareness about what AI is, right? That AI will now construct you a course specific to you and potentially specifically in your language. Just think about that for a minute, what that means to people. You don't have to pay for the course. You don't have to necessarily get a taxi to a training venue or whatever that might be. You've got a teacher in your pocket. And I think for the emerging markets and as people become more aware about AI, that's a major boost, I think, for people in our region. So yeah, maybe that's the place to stop.
Yeah. Amazing, Nick. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today.
Thanks, Lena. Pleasure to be part of the session today. And I hear that Zindi's just passed 100,000 members. So congratulations that your growth continues as well.
Oh, thank you, Nick.